The morning sun cast long shadows across the Afghan Valley as Navy Hospital. Corpsman Second Class Maria Santos checked her medical supplies for the third time. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency through the contents of her aid bag tourniquets. Hemostatic gauze, morphine auto-injectors, chest seals. Everything had its place. Everything had a purpose. Around her, the 8-man SEAL team conducted their final equipment checks with the quiet intensity that preceded every mission. Remember, Doc, you stay back and let the real warriors handle the heavy lifting. Petty Officer First Class Danny Bulldog Martinez called out, his voice carrying that familiar edge of condescension wrapped in false camaraderie. Several team members chuckled, but Santos had long since stopped rising to the bait. She'd been attached to SEAL Team 7 for 18 months, and the jokes about being just a medic had become as routine as morning. PD. Commander Jake Reaper Morrison studied the satellite imagery one final time. The mission was straightforward on paper. Extract a downed Air Force pilot whose F-16 had been shot down 12 clicks northeast of their position. Intelligence suggested light Taliban presence in the area, but Morrison had learned to distrust intelligence reports that used words like light and minimal. In his experience, the enemy had a habit of being exactly where they weren't supposed to be. Listen up, Morrison's voice cut through the pre-mission chatter. Pilot's call sign is Viper 2-1. He's holed up in a compound approximately 600 meters from the crash site. We go in fast, grab him, and get out. Questions? Santos raised her hand slightly. Sir, what's the pilot's condition? Unknown. That's why you're here, Doc. Morrison's tone was neutral, professional. Unlike some of the others, he'd never treated Santos as anything less than a full team member. But she could sense the unspoken expectation: patch up the wounded. Stay out of the way. Let the operators operate. The helicopter insertion went smoothly. The MH-60 Black Hawk, touching down just long enough for the team to fast rope into the rocky terrain before disappearing back into the morning sky. Santos felt the familiar weight of her medical pack as she moved with the team through the sparse vegetation, her M4 carbine held at the ready. She'd qualified expert with the weapon in boot camp. But that felt like a lifetime ago. The compound appeared exactly as briefed: a cluster of mud brick buildings surrounded by a low wall, typical of rural Afghan architecture. Too typical, Santos thought, her eyes scanning the surrounding ridgelines. Something felt wrong, though she couldn't articulate what. The silence was too complete, the absence of any human activity too convenient. Overwatch positions, Morrison whispered into his radio. Anything? Negative movement, came the reply from Petty Officer Williams, their designated marksman positioned on a ridge 300 meters back. Looks clear. Santos followed the team as they approached the compound's entrance. Her medical training had taught her to trust her instincts, and right now every instinct was screaming danger. She'd seen enough combat to recognize the signs: the way birds had stopped singing, the complete absence of any domestic animals, the too perfect positioning of the buildings that would create ideal kill zones. They found the pilot in the second building, conscious but badly injured. Captain Mike Viper Harrison had a compound fracture of his left leg and what appeared to be a concussion from the ejection. Santos immediately went to work, her hands moving with practiced efficiency as she assessed his injuries. Can you move him? Morrison asked, his eyes constantly scanning the windows and doorways. Give me 5 minutes to stabilize the leg, Santos replied, already reaching for her splinting materials. He's lost some blood, but nothing life-threatening if we... The first shot shattered the window above their heads, sending glass cascading down like deadly rain. Santos threw herself over the pilot as Morrison's voice exploded over the radio. Contact. Contact. We're taking fire from multiple positions. The world erupted into chaos. AK, 47 rounds punched through the mud brick walls as if they were paper, filling the air with dust and debris. Santos could hear the distinctive crack thump of incoming rounds, the sound that had haunted her dreams for months. Outside, she could hear Morrison coordinating the team's response, his voice calm despite the circumstances. "Williams, I need eyes on those muzzle flashes. I count at least 12 shooters, sir. They've got us surrounded." Santos continued working on the pilot's leg, even as bullets whined overhead. Her hands remained steady, a skill developed through countless hours of treating wounded Marines under fire. Captain Harrison grabbed her arm with surprising strength. "Doc, you need to get out of here." "Leave me." "Not happening, sir." Santos finished securing the splint and reached for her morphine. "We don't leave people behind." A new sound joined the symphony of gunfire, the heavy rhythmic pounding of a PKM machine gun. Santos recognized the distinctive sound immediately, and her blood ran cold. The Taliban had positioned a crew-served weapon with overlapping fields of fire, turning their extraction route into a killing field. Bulldogs hit. The scream came from outside, followed by the wet sound of someone choking on their own blood. Santos's medical training overrode everything else. She grabbed her aid bag and sprinted toward the door, ignoring Morrison's shouted warnings. Petty Officer Martinez lay in the courtyard, arterial blood pumping from a massive wound in his thigh. The femoral artery had been severed, and Santos knew he had maybe 3 minutes before he bled out. She slid across the dusty ground on her knees, her hands already reaching for a tourniquet. "Stay with me, Bulldog," she shouted over the gunfire, her fingers working to position the tourniquet high on his leg. "You're gonna be fine." The machine gun opened up again, its heavy rounds chewing apart the wall where Santos had been kneeling seconds before. She rolled left, dragging Martinez with her behind a low stone barrier. Her hands never stopped working, tourniquet applied, pressure dressing secured, morphine administered. "Doc." Morrison's voice carried across the courtyard. "We need to move. Now." Santos looked up to assess their tactical situation, and what she saw made her stomach drop. The Taliban had positioned themselves perfectly machine gun nest on the high ground to the north, riflemen in the buildings to the east and west, and what looked like an RPG team moving to cut off their southern escape route. It was a textbook L-shaped ambush, and they'd walked right into it. But as Santos studied the enemy positions, something else kicked in, something she'd kept buried for 18 months. Her eyes automatically calculated ranges and angles, wind direction, and elevation changes. The machine gun nest was approximately 600 meters out, elevated about 40 feet above their position. Light crosswind from the west, maybe 5 miles per hour. The calculations came as naturally as breathing, muscle memory from countless hours on shooting ranges with her father. Morrison appeared beside her, his face grim. "How's Martinez?" "Stable for now, but he needs a hospital." Santos's eyes remained fixed on the machine gun position. "Sir, that PKM has us pinned down. As long as it's operational, we're not going anywhere." "Tell me something I don't know, Doc." Morrison followed her gaze to the enemy position. "Williams is trying to get an angle, but they've got him suppressed too." As if summoned by their conversation, Williams's voice crackled over the radio, tight with pain. "I'm hit. Shrapnel to the shoulder. Can't maintain my position." Morrison's jaw tightened. Without their designated marksman, they had no way to engage targets at long range. The machine gun would cut them to pieces the moment they tried to move. Santos watched the muzzle flashes from the enemy position, her mind automatically tracking the weapon's traverse and calculating dead space. She'd seen enough combat to know they were running out of options, and fast. The Taliban fighters were getting bolder, their fire more accurate. It was only a matter of time before someone else got hit, and Santos knew that in a prolonged firefight, the enemy's superior numbers would eventually tell. They needed a miracle, or they needed someone to take out that machine gun. Her eyes found Morrison's Barrett .50 caliber rifle leaning against the wall where Williams had dropped it. The Barrett MA-201 seemed to mock Santos from where it leaned against the crumbling wall, its massive scope glinting in the harsh Afghan sunlight. 28 pounds of precision engineering, capable of reaching out and touching targets at distances that defied comprehension. Santos had watched Williams use it dozens of times, had even helped him clean and maintain the weapon, but she'd never fired one herself. "Sir." Petty Officer Rodriguez's voice cut through the gunfire from their position near the compound's eastern wall. "They're moving up on our 6. I count at least 4 tangos with RPGs." Morrison's face went ashen. An low-shaped ambush was bad enough, but if the Taliban managed to get rocket-propelled grenades into play from multiple angles, the team would be obliterated. Santos could see the tactical picture forming in the commander's mind. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and rapidly running out of time. "Williams, what's your status?" Morrison barked into his radio. The response came back weak and strained. "Shoulders torn up pretty bad, sir. Can't hold the rifle steady. Vision's going in and out." Santos felt her heart sink. Williams was their lifeline, their only hope of engaging the machine gun nest that had them pinned down like insects under a magnifying glass. Without him, they were trapped in a killing field with nowhere to run. The PKM opened up again, its heavy rounds pulverizing the stone barrier that protected Santos and the wounded Martinez. Chunks of masonry exploded around them, filling the air with choking dust and razor-sharp fragments. Santos pressed herself lower, shielding Martinez's body with her own as debris rained down on them. "Doc!" Morrison's voice carried a note of desperation she'd never heard before. "We need options." Santos raised her head slightly, studying the machine gun position through the swirling dust. 600 meters. Elevated position. Concrete reinforcement with sandbags. 3 visible shooters, possibly more. The calculations ran through her mind automatically. A skill set she'd kept buried for 18 months because nobody had ever asked. Nobody had ever cared to know that the medic might be capable of more than just patching wounds. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. "Distance shooting isn't about the rifle, Maria. It's about reading the environment, understanding the physics, and having the discipline to make the shot when everything's falling apart around you." Master Gunnery Sergeant Carlos Santos had been a legend in Marine sniper circles, with confirmed kills stretching back to Desert Storm. He'd started teaching his daughter to shoot when she was 12, not because he wanted her to follow in his footsteps, but because he believed every warrior should understand their tools completely. Santos had absorbed those lessons like a sponge, spending countless weekends on shooting ranges, learning to read wind and weather, to calculate bullet drop and drift. She'd scored expert marksman in Navy boot camp. But when the instructors saw her medical training designation, they'd simply nodded and moved on. Nobody asked about her shooting background. Nobody cared that she could put 10 rounds through a quarter-size group at 300 meters. She was a medic, and medics stayed in the back and fixed people. But now, watching Morrison's face as he calculated their dwindling options, Santos realized that her carefully maintained anonymity might have just doomed them all. "Sir," she said quietly, her voice barely audible over the gunfire, "I might have a solution." Morrison looked at her with confusion. "Doc, unless you've got a miracle in that A bag, the Barrett." Santos nodded toward Williams's rifle. "Of Holdings, full? I can make that shot." The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Morrison stared at her as if she'd just claimed she could fly. Around them, the gunfire continued its deadly rhythm, but for a moment, everything seemed suspended in time. "Santos, that's a 600-meter shot under combat conditions. Williams is a trained sniper with years of experience, and even he..." My father was Master Gunny Carlos Santos, 3rd Marine Division. Santos's voice was steady, matter-of-fact. He'd taught me to shoot before I could drive. I'd been calculating that shot since we got pinned down. Morrison's eyes widened slightly. He knew the name. Every sniper in the military knew the name. Carlos Santos was a legend, a ghost who'd stalked through 3 different conflicts and emerged with a reputation that bordered on mythical. Another burst from the PKM sent rounds cracking overhead, and Santos could hear Rodriguez shouting warnings about the advancing RPG team. Time was running out, and Morrison knew it. His eyes flicked between Santos and the Barrett, weighing impossible odds against certain death. "You sure about this, Doc?" Santos met his gaze without flinching. "Give me the rifle, sir." Morrison grabbed the Barrett and slid it across the dusty ground to her position. Santos's hands closed around the familiar weight of precision engineering, and something inside her shifted. For 18 months, she'd been just the medic, content to let others handle the killing while she focused on healing. But war had a way of demanding everything from everyone, and sometimes the line between healer and warrior disappeared entirely. She quickly checked the rifles. Condition bolt action smooth. Scope mounts tight. Magazine loaded with .50 BMG rounds that could punch through engine blocks. Williams had zeroed the weapon at 500 meters, which meant she'd need to compensate for the additional 100 meters to target. "Talk to me, Doc," Morrison said, his voice tight with tension. "What do you need?" Santos settled into a prone position behind the low wall, the Barrett's bipod legs digging into the rocky ground. Through the scope, the machine gun nest leaped into sharp focus. She could see 3 Taliban fighters clearly, the gunner behind the PKM, a loader feeding ammunition belts, and what appeared to be a spotter with binoculars. "Wind's about 5 miles per hour from the west," she said, her voice taking on a clinical tone that Morrison had never heard before. "Range is 600 meters, elevation approximately 40 feet. I need 30 seconds of suppressing fire to mask my muzzle flash." Morrison keyed his radio. "All stations, this is Reaper. Lay down suppressing fire on my mark. Continuous fire for 30 seconds, then cease fire immediately." Santos adjusted the scope's elevation turret, her fingers moving with practiced precision. The crosshairs settled on the machine gunner's center mass, and she began controlling her breathing. In through the nose, out through the mouth, finding that natural respiratory pause where the body was perfectly still. "Ready," she whispered. "All stations, execute." The world exploded with gunfire as the SEAL team opened up with everything they had. M4 carbines chattered on full automatic, sending streams of 5.56 millimeters rounds toward the enemy positions. The noise was deafening, but Santos filtered it out, her entire world narrowing to the small circle of the scope's field of view. The machine gunner was young, maybe 19 or 20, with a sparse beard and intense dark eyes. For a split second, Santos hesitated. This wasn't the target on a range. This was a human being with hopes and dreams and people who loved him. But then she thought about Martinez bleeding beside her, about Williams wounded and unable to fight, about the RPG team moving to flank them. Her finger found the trigger's sweet spot, that perfect balance point where the slightest additional pressure would send death flying across 600 meters of hostile terrain. The crosshairs settled on the gunner's chest, and Santos began her final breathing cycle. In, out, natural respiratory pause. The Barrett bucked against her shoulder like an angry mule, its massive muzzle brake redirecting gases in a spectacular display of fire and fury. Through the scope, Santos watched the .50 caliber round cover the distance in less than a second, striking the machine gunner's center mass and spinning him away from his weapon like a broken doll. But there was no time to celebrate. The loader was already moving toward the PKM, trying to get the weapon back into action. Santos worked the bolt with mechanical precision, ejecting the spent brass and chambering a fresh round. The loader's hands were reaching for the machine gun's grips when Santos's second shot found him, punching through his torso and dropping him beside his fallen comrade. The third fighter, the spotter, broke and ran. Santos tracked him through the scope for 2 heartbeats. Her crosshairs centered on his fleeing form. Her finger rested on the trigger, ready to complete the engagement. But something held her back, maybe mercy, maybe the knowledge that he was no longer a threat. She let him go. "Holy shit," someone whispered over the radio. Doc just took out the whole nest. But Santos was already scanning for new threats, her training taking over completely. The machine gun was silent, but she could see muzzle flashes from windows across the street. More targets. More threats to her team. The Barrett spoke again. The silence that followed the last gunshot was almost more unsettling than the firefight itself. Santos remained behind the Barrett's scope, scanning the compound and surrounding buildings for any remaining threats. Her breathing was controlled, steady, but she could feel the adrenaline beginning to ebb, leaving behind a strange mixture of exhaustion and hyper-awareness. "All clear," Rodriguez's voice crackled over the radio from his overwatch position. No movement detected. Morrison rose from cover cautiously, his eyes never leaving Santos as she safed the rifle and began checking on Martinez. The transformation he'd witnessed was nothing short of extraordinary. One moment she'd been the team medic, focused entirely on treating wounds, and the next she'd become a precision instrument of warfare, eliminating threats with surgical accuracy. "Doc," Morrison said quietly, approaching her position. "That was some shooting." Santos looked up from Martinez's bandages, her hands automatically checking his pulse and pupil response. "He's stable, sir. We need to get him to a hospital within the next few hours. But he'll make it." It was as if the last 10 minutes hadn't happened, as if she hadn't just eliminated an entire machine gun crew and provided overwatch for the team's advance. Morrison had seen combat stress affect people in different ways, but he'd never witnessed someone compartmentalize so completely. "Santos," he pressed, "where did you learn to shoot like that?" For a moment, her hands paused in their medical work. When she looked up, Morrison saw something in her eyes he'd never noticed before, a depth of experience that went far beyond her 24 years. "My father started teaching me when I was 12, she said simply. "Master Gunnery Sergeant Carlos Santos, 3rd Marine Division. He said every warrior should understand their tools completely." Morrison felt his breath catch. He knew that name, knew the legend that surrounded it. Carlos Santos had been a ghost in 3 different conflicts, with confirmed kills that read like something out of a movie. The man had been a living legend in sniper circles, and his daughter had just demonstrated that the apple hadn't fallen far from the tree. "Why didn't you ever mention this?" Morrison asked. 18 months we've been working together, and you never said a word about your background." Santos returned to checking Martinez's vitals, her voice taking on a defensive edge. "Would it have mattered? Everyone sees the medical cross and assumes that's all I am. Just a medic. Stay back. Patch people up. Let the real warriors handle the fighting." The words hit Morrison like a physical blow. He thought back over the past 18 months, remembering countless briefings where Santos had been relegated to medical concerns, countless missions where her tactical input had been dismissed or ignored. The team had been so focused on her medical expertise that they'd never bothered to ask what other skills she might possess. "Jesus Santos, I'm sorry. We should have—" "It's fine, sir." But her tone suggested it wasn't fine at all. "I knew what I was signing up for when I chose the medical track. Can't be both a healer and a killer, right?" Before Morrison could respond, the sound of rotor blades filled the air. The extraction helicopter was inbound, drawn by their success signal. Santos immediately shifted back into medic mode, coordinating the evacuation of the wounded and ensuring Captain Harrison was properly stabilized for transport. as the team loaded onto the Black Hawk. Morrison found himself studying Santos with new eyes. She moved with the same professional efficiency she'd always displayed. But now he could see the subtle signs he'd missed before, the way she automatically scanned for threats even while treating patients. The unconscious manner in which she positioned herself to maintain fields of fire. The tactical awareness that went far beyond basic combat training. The flight back to base was conducted in relative silence, each team member processing what they'd witnessed. Martinez drifted in and out of consciousness, his hand occasionally reaching out to squeeze Santos's arm in gratitude. Williams sat hunched over his wounded shoulder, stealing glances at the woman who'd saved their lives with skills none of them had known she possessed. It was Bulldog Martinez who finally broke the silence. His voice weak but clear. "Doc, I owe you my life. That machine gun would have cut us all to pieces." Santos looked uncomfortable with the attention. "Just doing my job." "Bulldog's right," Rodriguez chimed in from across the helicopter's cargo bay. "That was some serious long-range shooting. Where do you learn to handle a Barrett like that?" Santos glanced at Morrison, who nodded encouragingly. For the first time in 18 months, someone was asking about her capabilities beyond medical training. "My father was a Marine sniper," she said quietly. "He believed in being prepared for anything. Started teaching me to shoot when I was 12, competitive marksmanship through high school and college. I was ranked 3rd in the state for precision rifle before I enlisted." The team exchanged glances, the implications sinking in. They'd been working alongside someone with world-class shooting skills and had never bothered to find out. "Why didn't you go the sniper route?" Williams asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. "With skills like that, you could have written your own ticket." Santos was quiet for a long moment, watching the Afghan landscape scroll past through the helicopter's window. "Because I wanted to save lives, not just take them. My father had nightmares about the people he'd killed. I thought maybe I could find a different way to serve." Morrison felt something shift in his understanding of the woman sitting across from him. She hadn't hidden her skills out of modesty or fear. She'd deliberately chosen a path that emphasized healing over killing, even knowing it would mean her other abilities would be overlooked and undervalued. "But today you did both," Morrison observed. "Saved lives and took them." Santos nodded slowly. "Sometimes the line between healer and warrior disappears. Sometimes you have to be both." The helicopter touched down at Forward Operating Base Chapman, and the controlled chaos of a medical evacuation took over. Santos supervised the transfer of Martinez and Harrison to the base hospital, her medical training once again taking precedence. But Morrison noticed the way the other medical personnel deferred to her judgment, the quiet authority she commanded when lives were on the line. Later that evening, Morrison found Santos in the base's small chapel, sitting alone in the back pew. She wasn't praying, just staring at the simple wooden cross mounted on the wall. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. Santos gestured to the empty space beside her. "Free country, sir." "Well, sort of." Morrison sat down, studying her profile in the dim light. "How are you holding up?" "I keep thinking about that kid," Santos said quietly. "The machine gunner. He couldn't have been more than 19. Probably had a family back home, people who loved him. He was trying to kill us, Santos. You did what you had to do." "I know. Doesn't make it easier." She turned to look at Morrison directly. "My father used to say that the hardest part about being a sniper wasn't making the shot. It was living with it afterward." Morrison nodded, understanding. Every warrior carried ghosts, and Santos had just acquired her first. "For what it's worth," Morrison said, "you saved 8 lives today. Martinez, Williams, Harrison, and the rest of us. That machine gun would have cut us to pieces." Santos was quiet for a moment, then asked, "What happens now, sir? Do I go back to being just the medic?" Morrison smiled grimly. Not if I have anything to say about it. When we get back to base, we're having a conversation about advanced training. The Navy has programs for dual-qualified personnel, medical, and sniper. You interested? For the first time since the firefight, Santos smiled. Yes, sir. I think I am. As they sat in the quiet chapel, Morrison realized that sometimes the best warriors came from the most unexpected places. Santos had spent 18 months proving she could heal, and one afternoon proving she could kill when necessary. The combination made her more valuable than any single-purpose operator. One more thing, Santos, Morrison said as they prepared to leave. No more hiding your capabilities. This team works best when everyone brings everything they have to the table. Santos stood and straightened her uniform. Roger that, sir. No more secrets. Walking out into the Afghan night, Morrison knew that SEAL Team 7 had just become significantly more dangerous. They still had their medic, but now they also had a sniper who understood that sometimes the greatest act of healing was eliminating the threat that endangered the wounded. Santos had finally found balance between her two natures, and the team would never be the same.